Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader on Switch 2 was one of my most anticipated games to close out this year. And after playing for an hour, can't believe I'm going to say this, I'm ready to retire it. Let's get into it. Just quickly first, if this helps you out, do me a favour and subscribe. Help me recoup some of the 50 quid I burnt today picking this up for a review. If you've never played Rogue Trader, it's a massive, choice-heavy CRPG set in the Warhammer 40k universe. Think Baldur's Gate, but grimdark. Deep turn-based combat, branching storylines, moral decisions, and a whole ship's crew you're managing as you explore the fringes of this galaxy. Now, on other platforms, it's a genuinely ambitious, well-loved RPG. I actually played on PC, which is why I was so excited to see how it would translate to Switch 2. And for anyone hoping to jump between platforms, like myself, there's no cross-save functionality. I do want to put that out there. But before we do go any further, I do want to make this very, very clear. Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader is a very good game. However, on Switch 2, it's not. So what it really comes down to here is performance and visuals, but I do want to touch on another issue that I ran into immediately. So in the first hour, I had 2 hard crashes, including one that was during an autosave. That didn't save anything and it kicked me backwards. And look, with Owlcat Studios, the team behind this game, I was a little nervous alongside my excitement because the PC version has its fair share of issues. But it really feels like optimization on Switch 2 has been a real struggle. Now, to their credit, the team are already on Reddit. They're saying a large patch is coming soon. But soon could mean tomorrow, or it could mean months. It is completely unspecific, which honestly begs the question, why release it in this state? What's the gain? And it's also not surprising to see that no reviews were live at launch, and no advance keys went out to creators or press. We are treated as 2 separate funnels in the review world, but neither seems to have been given access, and I think it's because they knew people were going to complain. But getting into the hands-on experience, I know a lot of people are immediately going to point to the visuals and say that's rough, and honestly, yes it is, but the first thing I noticed was the frame rate. The game is incredibly choppy, and this is just the opening hour. From your very first step though, your newly created character stutters across the screen. It looks like an animation issue, but it's paired with a frame rate that seems to want to hit 60, yet realistically it tops out around 40 FPS and frequently drops into the mid-20s. It is so erratic and constantly fluctuating that it creates this really horrible visual effect. Now occasionally you're going to get these moments where it smooths out, and that's the game I want to be playing. It's not a perfect 60 still, but it feels fine. The problem is those moments are rare and the dips constant. And during those dips, you'll also hit noticeable stutters. Even the camera becomes a problem. Rotate it during battle and it'll skip just enough to throw you out of sync with what you're trying to aim at. Now I kept pushing forward for 90 minutes of gameplay, I'd say, hoping this was maybe just an exploration issue and that things would stabilize once I got into some combat. Something I could maybe live with, but sadly, just isn't the case. The performance problems bleed into everything. The whole game just feels sluggish. Interactions, they take a moment to kind of kick in. Movement has a slight delay to it. Even navigating menus feels heavier than it should. Text boxes sized really well for the handheld screen, but they just pop up in unpredictable places, often overlapping or obscuring each other in a way that just feels messy, and then you're trying to close them, but the game's taking a few seconds to catch up with what the hell you're doing with the controller. It is just weird. And then there's a lack of Switch 2 support. This is a CRPG, a perfect playground for the new mouse-style Joy-Con controls, but they're not included. It just feels like a straight port without any effort to really make it feel at home on the platform. This said, at this point, just make it smooth. Let's worry about those things later. Now, let's talk visuals, starting with the anti-aliasing options, because the game actually gives you 3, TAA, SMAA, and off. SMAA is the preset, and it's the option I stuck with for most of the footage you are seeing. It sharpens the image a little, and it cleans up some of the jagged edges, but you'll still see noticeable shimmer on fine detail. Now, switching over to TAA, the image couldn't be softer. It wipes away pretty much all of the jagged edges, sure, but everything here, characters, environments, even text, takes on this blurred look that I found really hard to live with, and I can see why it wasn't the default. And then turning AA off entirely does the opposite, of course. The game becomes sharper, but the jagged edges become incredibly noticeable, especially whenever you move the camera. It actually makes the shimmering even more distracting. What's interesting though is that none of these settings noticeably affect performance. You're really just choosing your preferred flavor of image quality, so softer, sharper, or somewhere in the middle. But honestly, I was actually hoping these might help with the frame rate. Sadly, it's not the case. There's maybe a couple of frames difference between them, don't get me wrong, but nothing worth writing home about. With all of this complaining though, I do still want to be fair. There are moments where Rogue Trader on Switch 2 actually looks pretty good. The environments do have a solid level of detail, and the lighting can be genuinely impressive. You know, those long shadows, warm glows, atmospheric beams of light. It really sells that Warhammer tone. The problem though, again, is this image, the art direction, shall we say, really nice. The resolution, everything just looks soft, no matter what aliasing, anything. It almost smears at times, and you lose a lot of the crispness that makes this game shine on PC or other platforms. But again, some highlights, blood effects, the fire, the carnage in battle. Even when it's very clearly pixelated, there is something gloriously over the top about watching it just all erupt across the screen. It is just a shame the overall presentation is being dragged down by such a low base resolution, because again, art direction underneath all of this, it's doing a hell of a lot of heavy lifting. But the low resolution, coming back to it, it does one thing that really annoyed me. Character readability in battle is tough. Units blend into the environment too easily, and during the early encounters, it was surprisingly hard to actually track who's who and where everyone is positioned. Finally, none of this really improves in handheld mode. In fact, it feels like the game actually drops to an even lower resolution here. The upside is jagged edges are now slightly less noticeable, smaller screen, but the downside is that performance doesn't feel any better. Same stuttering, a erratic frame rate still, just presented at a softer, blurrier resolution. So yeah, the final verdict, and again I want to stress here, there's a good game in here. I am a fan of it. There's a reason I've been refreshing the eShop all day waiting to download it. But this version just isn't it. Right now, Rogue Trader on Switch 2 is held back by unstable performance, a constantly fluctuating frame rate, low resolution, sluggish interactions, UI issues, crashes, and it all adds up to an experience I simply cannot recommend in its current state. And my advice here is simple. Save your cash until they get this patch out into the wild. Now, I will make sure I keep my ear to the ground and update you as soon as anything changes, because there's a 100-hour RPG hiding under this mess. And once it's up to scratch, it's absolutely just one you need to be playing. And that's Rogue Trader. This is the last kind of news I wanted to be dropping, but it is what it is. Hopefully we can look back in like 6 months and say, remember the state this launched in, and look at it now, glorious. But only time will tell. If you enjoyed this one, subscribe, helps me out a huge amount. And yeah, see you in the next one. Cheers all.